Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on the CSBG Annual Report, Module 4, Individual and Family Level. For those who may not know me, I am Jackie Orr, the CSBG State Assistance Director at NASCAS. Along with myself, we have several presenters for today's webinar, and I will introduce them. We have Seth Hassett, who's the Director of the Division of State Assistance at OCS, Rae Tamblyn, the Research and Communications Analyst at NASCAS, Barbara Mooney, the Director of the Association of Nationally Certified Roma Trainers, and Kate Blunt at the Federal Consulting Group. But before we begin our presentation, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items with you. All of you are on mute. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask them using the chat option on the webinar toolbar. You'll find that on the right-hand side of your screen, and you'll see a text box where you can type a question. Please remember to select all panelists to ensure that all of our presenters can see your questions. Questions will be read aloud and answered during the question and answer portion of the webinar, which will happen after the presentation. In order to keep to our schedule, if we don't have time to respond to all your questions, we will compile your questions into a frequently asked questions document following the webinar, and we'll make sure that will be posted. This webinar will also be recorded and will be posted to the NASCAS website. And I also want to let you know that already posted to the NASCAS website are the slides for this webinar now that you are able to go ahead and download. And one more item before we get started. At the close of the webinar, we will have 2 polls for you to complete. They will pop up as the webinar ends, so please make sure you answer them, and we will also remind you of that before the webinar is over. So with all of those housekeeping details taken care of, I'm going to start our presentation, and I'm going to turn it over to Kate Blunt.
Great. Thanks, Jackie. Welcome, everyone. This is the 4th in a 5-part webinar series. And in case you have missed any of them, let me tell you what we have already completed and what is now posted on the NASCAS website, should you want to go and look at those. So we did an update and an overview of the annual report and Roma Next Generation. We did a whole webinar on the state administration module, which is module 1, which I know the states will be particularly interested in because it covers all of the aspects of that part of the report. Last week we did module 3, which is the community level, and of course today we're doing the individual family level, and as Jackie mentioned, this is being recorded and will be available probably by tomorrow. And then next week, which is next Thursday on the 14th, same time, we will be covering module 1 and 2. So we'll do the state admin section again, but more focusing on kind of having a discussion and walking through in more detail that. And then, so you might want to go and look at what's already on the NASCAS website in terms of the overview, so you know exactly what's in that module. And then we'll also cover the fiscal capacity pieces of the annual report. So it's an ambitious webinar series, and hopefully it's been informative. 3 things we really hope to accomplish by doing these webinars. First, we want everyone to understand what Roma Next Generation is all about and how the role of the CSBG annual report plays into all of that. We want everyone to understand the specifics of what is being proposed in the new annual report. There are a lot of changes, there are a lot of specifics, so we're trying to give you as much heads up as possible. And then we want to learn, we want you to learn and understand what's needed from you during the 60-day comment period, which we have now just begun. So we really do need some help from you all. So to that end, we've put together an agenda for today that covers quite a number of points. We want to talk a little bit about Roma Next Generation, how it builds on the Roma Foundation. We will talk about the current status of the draft annual report. Most of the webinar will be on the module overview. We're going to look at the initial feedback, what you told us, what clarifications and changes we made based on that, and then talk about the outline of module 4 and what the reporting forms look like. We actually have some shots here, some screenshots for you to look at. Then we want to talk about the implementation, because we are proposing a phased-in reporting based on a lot of comments we got from the field in terms of how quickly and how well we can do this. Of course, we have next steps, and then we will have, I expect, quite a good chunk of time for some questions and answers. So to reiterate what Jackie said, anytime you have a question, put it in. Don't wait to the end, because the sooner we know what the question is, the sooner we can tee it up. So feel free to type in questions, and then we'll get to those at the end. So that's what we're going to cover today, and we're going to start off with Seth Hassett talking about the Roma Foundation and the Roma Next Generation. Seth.
Okay, and thank you, Kate, and thank you to everyone who is participating in this webinar. So Roma Next Generation builds on an important foundation of over 20 years of work in results-oriented management and accountability, or ROMA, in CSBG. Roma Next Generation, as we all know, is a major undertaking, and our goal is to move CSBG forward and strengthen community action over the next 5 to 10 years. Where we want to be moving forward is to assure that all levels of the CSBG network, OCS, states, and CAAs, use performance data to achieve greater stability and economic security for families and communities. We recognize that there are different levels of responsibility and different roles at different parts of the network, and our goal is to ensure that each level of the network ultimately supports the full Roma cycle, and we work together to use data on people, services, and outcomes for decision-making, always focusing on the community level as the point of ultimate decision-making in terms of identifying needs and implementing the services and strategies. As many of you know, Roma Next Generation builds on a number of other pieces that are part of a larger performance management framework for CSBG. OCS launched several initiatives in 2012, all part of this new performance management framework. One focused on establishing organizational standards for eligible entities. A second component focuses on creating state and federal accountability measures to track and measure organizational performance by CSBG lead agencies and by OCS. Our overall focus is on integrating information on the people served, the services and strategies provided, and the outcomes achieved by the eligible entities. This is envisioned as a system for continuous quality improvement focused on creating learning organizations at all levels of the CSBG network. And it requires attention to the capacity of state, local, and federal data systems and support. The original push for Roma was a response to the Government Performance and Results Act. In 1993, GPRA was established with the requirement that federal programs engage in performance management activities, such as setting performance goals, measuring results, and reporting progress. This was a government-wide initiative, and GPRA launched a performance management wave in the public and private sector that resulted in reporting on the results externally to funders and other stakeholders. In 2010, the GPRA Modernization Act set new expectations for federal agencies to set clear and ambitious goals, measure, analyze, and communicate performance information to identify successful practices that can be disseminated, as well as problematic practices that should be prevented or corrected. GPRA modernization also called for federal agencies to conduct frequent, in-depth performance reviews and to drive progress on the agency priorities. This next slide is really an important one. This comes from the President's executive order that was associated with the GPRA Modernization Act, and it indicates that the goal is to create a performance management framework that encourages good management and innovation without fear of penalty for failing to achieve every ambitious target that has been set, but with heightened pressure to achieve breakthrough gains on priorities. And I just think this is a critical emphasis that this is not intended as a punitive system, but one that involves high expectations to meet challenging community needs, to find new ways and new approaches, and to share breakthroughs that are making a difference for communities. GIPR modernization reflects the most recent wave in performance management, and the latest reform wave calls for focusing on analyzing data on results and using the information to improve programs and the outcomes achieved, rather than merely reporting to outside stakeholders. So now I think we are going to be handing over to Barbara Mooney to talk a little bit about the Roma cycle.
Thanks, Seth. And it's important to keep all of that information in mind as we talk about what Roma Next Generation means in terms of the performance management system that we've been using for the past 20 years. And the Roma cycle really is a way for us to understand the continuous nature of this performance management system. What I'm going to do is walk through each of the phases of the cycle and talk a little bit about how the Roma Next Generation approach changes the cycle. We start with assessment, and we know that we're assessing both the community needs and the resources for our specific community. That we've identified the community in which we work, and we want to find out what we can reasonably address, either independently as an agency or in partnership with other organizations. And then we take that information from the needs assessment and we move into planning. We've been working on a national theory of change and been looking at the importance of creating those core principles and key elements that guide strategic planning. And so both a national theory of change and then a local theory of change that could be developed from it will help us guide the planning of the services and strategies that agencies will be using. The new thing about this process is the theory of change. That's the next generation element that gets added into what we've already been doing with planning. But we want to specifically think of the needs. Are they family, agency, community level needs? What impact do we want to have on those needs? What's our performance targets? What do we think we're going to be able to accomplish? And then what are we going to pick to do? What activities, what services and strategies do we plan to do? And then once we have our plan, then we implement our services and strategies to produce the results that or hopefully produce the results we expect. So in Roma Next Generation, we want to clearly identify those services and strategies, those initiatives that the agency has selected to implement. And we want to make sure that we can connect those services and strategies to both the population that we plan to serve and to the outcomes that we hope that population will achieve. And so we'll want to look at this process of observing progress and using data starting in the implementation phase, not waiting until the next year to think about the data, but looking at the progress as it's happening. And so we can decide what changes we might need to make while we're in the implementation phase. And then when we move to the achievement of results or the reporting phase, we're going to be using the new family and community level national performance indicators, which we'll talk about later. But the idea that these will help us to track the progress that we're making towards the agency goals in our local theory of change and towards the community action national goals. And we want to look at how those specific services and strategies that we have identified support the outcomes and respond to the needs. Remember, we always want to go back to the question, are we responding to the needs that were identified? The final phase is really the analysis of the data, comparing what we have done with what we thought we would do. This is probably the most important element in the next generation approach, because it tells us we need to analyze and use our data that we've gotten from the other phases of the cycle. How well did we track our success? Did we meet our targets? What outcomes were achieved? And what contributed to those outcomes? And then looking at all of this, what can we do to better respond? And that leads us back into the assessment phase again. I think this is where I turn it back over to Seth.
Barbara, actually, I think you're continuing.
Okay, sorry, thanks. So one of the things that we want to make sure that we understand is that the community action agencies aren't expected to only use CSBG funding to be successful. We know that one of the charges to the Community Action Network is to leverage and maximize federal, state, and local funding, and that we're to try to build on this tradition that we've had using our new national theory of change, the new understanding, the more in-depth understanding of Roma, and really, and this new annual report, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, but that this really reflects the long-standing expectation that the community action agencies report on the entire agency's work, not just about what's funded specifically by CSBG, but that we look at everything that we've done, and this is built on our history and over 50 years of experience in doing this work. Sorry, now I'm going to turn it over to Seth.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. So as we've shared in prior webinars and other communications, OCS is implementing Roma Next Generation as part of a larger update in how we receive and analyze data through an annual report that will be approved by the Office of Management and Budget. So there are 3 steps to the process that we've been undergoing. The first one was not required, but considered to be critical for this process, which was an initial feedback period administered by NASCAS. The second phase is a formal 60-day OMB comment period, which we have actually are currently in the midst of, and then it will be followed by a final 30-day OMB comment period. So to share with you what we've, the initial comment period, which has been completed, was involved OCS and NASCAP working together. NASCAS compiled survey data, modified, and then we worked together to analyze the results, modify the draft annual report, and identify areas that needed clarification or changes. We made multiple revisions to the forms and developed some supplemental documents that are now available to support your review of the annual report, and those are all available on NASCAP's website. The current status of efforts, the Federal Register notice for the 60-day comment period the notice was posted on June 16th of 2016. The following day, OCS put out a detailed Dear Colleague letter that also puts some of the information into context and then includes attachments with critical information. Again, much of that is available on our website. Other information, supplemental information, can be obtained on the NASCAP website. And so the web address is provided here in a link, and we certainly encourage you to go there. The 60-day comment period will run through August 15th of 2016. After that, we will analyze the input, again, go through another process of edits, modifications, clarifications, a variety of changes as necessary, and then we will enter a 30-day comment period. We currently project for September of 2016. We certainly expect to enter that process in the fall. This is just an highlights that there are 4 modules. The one that we are working, as we shared earlier, are doing webinars to discuss and go through the content on all of these sections, but the one that we're talking about today is Module 4, which is focused on the individual and family level information. So now we're going to hand over to Jackie, and Jackie is going to talk about the initial feedback period and go through a little bit more detail what we heard.
All right, great, Seth. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm going to go over the information that was received from the network during the initial feedback period. And you may remember that was back in March and through part of April as well. So let's get started. Okay, so as you can see, responses received, we had an excellent response rate. And Survey 3 is highlighted specifically here about the individual and family level work, and that had 609 responses. But I also want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who responded to the survey or also sent comments and letters, because not only did we receive comments in the survey or the survey results, but we received lots of emails with comments and letters from the network as well. We heard from 50% of the states and state associations and over 50% of community action agencies. So we really appreciate the time and effort that you put into responding. And we took the opportunity to listen to all of your comments, and that helped us to understand what modifications and clarifications that we needed to make going forward. So let's take a look in a little bit more detail some parts of the survey. So let me move to the next slide. Okay, so this is the response to the characteristics report. How well does each report allow you to describe the population your agency works with? You may remember that question as a part of the survey. I just first wanted to make a comment where you see it says weighted. What we did is, you may remember for some of you that if some of the state offices or state associations responded to the surveys as a group, so maybe a state association responded to the survey for 18 community action agencies in their state. So what we did is we calculated it not to show as only one response, but all the responses were calculated and counted. So for this reaction to the characteristics report, you can see that there were 2 reports, the baseline characteristics report, which is a new report, and we'll be talking more about that a little bit later, and then the all characteristics report. And you can see 5 very well all the way to 1 not well. So 65 of the respondents responded either 5 or 4 very well to the baseline characteristics report, and 74% rated 5 or 4 for the all characteristics report. I do want to make a comment, though, that we did receive lots of other comments about the baseline characteristics report. So we're going to be talking about the modifications and clarifications we made to that report later in the webinar. So let's take a look at another question. We also asked you to tell us how well the list of services in each domain or section allow you to describe all the work you do to ensure individuals and families with low incomes are stable and achieve economic security. So this was the services list was something that was also new, and it was overwhelmingly positive feedback for that. You can see the domains on the left, and then you can also see the ratings from the folks who responded, and the majority of them tend to be in the 5 very well and the 4 rankings. And I'm going to move to the next slide, which is essentially the rest of the domains in that same area of the services list. And the one that had the least favorable, I guess, was the civic engagement and community involvement, but that was still very positive, with 56% of folks rating that 5 or 4, and those columns are on the left-hand side of the chart you see here. Okay, let's move on to another question that came from the survey. This was around the national performance indicators. How well do the indicators in each domain allow you to capture the impact of the work you do to ensure individuals and families with low incomes are stable and achieve economic security? So you can see here that we had a little bit more varied responses in this area, with a greater number in the 3 ranking, which is sort of in the middle there between very well and not well. So you can see the employment, education, and cognitive and income and asset domains. And let me move to the next slide. And these are the responses for the rest of the domains: housing, health and social behavioral development, and civic engagement and community involvement. And you can see from the civic engagement and community involvement, with 44% or 45% of folks indicating a 3 for that particular domain. And then the last thing we're going to take a look at, whoops, I moved ahead, sorry about that. Let's go back. You may remember those stability indicator options. So the question was, how well does each option for the indicators in the individual and family stability domain allow you to capture the impact of the work you do to ensure individuals and families with low incomes are stable and achieve economic security? So option 1, for those of you who may not remember what all the options were, option 1 was individuals who achieve 1 or more NPIs. Option 2 was the number and percent of individuals engaged with a community action agency who achieved and maintained the ability to meet their basic needs for 6 months. And then option 3 was individuals engaged with a community action agency who report improved financial well-being. And from the slide here, you can see that option 1 was the most highly regarded of the 3, though there were still 37% in the not well or well categories or rankings there. So now that is it for your reactions to the survey in the family and individual level work. So now I'm going to turn it over to Kate Blunt, and she's going to talk more about the key issues.
Thanks, Jackie. So the next few slides that I'm going to talk about is kind of a summary of the dozens of pages of comments that we received, which we culled through and identified the critical issues for OCS and NASCAS to consider, and which sort of guided many of the changes that you're going to hear about. We tried to combine an analysis of the data, which Jackie just presented, and sort of the comments, which gave some meat to that data. Clearly, as the data showed, there were some areas where people felt a little less positive and more negative, for instance, the baseline report, certain parts of the MPI reports. So I'm going to walk through, on a high-level basis, the key issues that were identified and which we then tried to address. So let's start with the characteristics report. We got extensive comments and some confusion about that baseline report. There was a mixture of comments that went from, hey, we saw great value to being able to have this data, to those that did not see any value and thought this would just be a lot of extra work. We heard that there would be some concerns about systems capacity in terms of getting an unduplicated account and being able to maintain client history. The whole issue of being able to track the population, track individuals across systems in any agency. There were questions regarding kind of challenges to how do we count, how do we get credit for one-time services where maybe we aren't picking up characteristics. And then probably the major sense of confusion was, and this was certainly our fault in terms of how we named it when we call it a baseline report. Many people thought that that meant we were going to take the information from that report and use it to compare to a later point in time. And that is clearly not the intent. This is not a report that will be used in any way to compare people at a later point in time. So you will see in our later slides some of the clarifications and changes we made about the baseline report. That got probably the most changes in terms of the all characteristics report. In terms of the characteristics report, in terms of the all characteristics report, some thoughts that came forward were let's consider adding not reported to every category. There were some issues about how do we collect data about gender. Maybe we could do a little bit more research about defining that so that we made sure we were being inclusive and respectful and kind of followed what other federal agencies were doing. And then there were comments that showed that we need to do a little bit more clarification, which hopefully we will have done in the report, about when characteristics will be collected, that these reports are to be agency-wide, unduplicated counts, and that not all characteristics need to be collected and reported. We have some characteristics that are more mandatory and others that we think will be helpful. On the MPIs, we got a lot of positive comments about removing outputs. People certainly are sophisticated enough to know the difference between outcomes and outputs, and we took all the outputs out. Those are now in our service list. Counts of what we provide or how many people get something is an output, and those are now part of a different list. There were concerns in terms of the MPIs about following up, the follow-up requirements for job retention, how long somebody keeps the job. There was, again, confusion about having to report on every indicator. And we are trying to stress in the instructions and in the report that this is a menu of indicators. If this is an area you're working on, if this is where you are providing services, then this is an indicator you would choose to report on. So you may not be reporting on all indicators. You may not even be reporting on half the indicators. You will be reporting on that which you are working on. And also whether or not you would report a service if it is not funded by CSBG. And of course, we've concluded you want to report every service that's provided. And there was a lot of clarification needed and requested about the stability measure options. And we will go into that a little bit later, but that was an issue that was raised. Other things that we heard about in terms of the individual and family level MPIs, a lot of it was around defining, making definitions, and determining how we calculate. So clearly we will be providing definitions and ways to calculate, but things were about questions about how do you define basic needs? How do you define living wage? How do you calculate the living wage? Are homeless definitions comparable to what HUD is doing? So some questions about being able to define those things. Also defining services. We have a lot of services, and some of which we added, which you all provided, making sure that we define those so we have consistency across the network. Recommendation that we eliminate all of the words that said classes and sessions, and that we also add a classification of other in each category. So that's what we heard. That was a lot that you all suggested, and we took all of that in consideration and then proceeded to try to make some clarifications and changes. So let me turn it back over to Barbara to kind of walk through on a high level what we're looking at, what we changed. Barbara?
Thanks, Kate. So you'll see that the first thing that we addressed was the concerns around measuring and defining services. Since this is a new area of the report, we want to make sure that it's as clear and as easy to use as possible. And so the recommendations were that the words classes and sessions be removed. And so you'll find that that has occurred. And that the recommendation that other options are added to each domain was also important for our consideration. So, and that was the first critical clarification that we need to address is this baseline characteristics report that Kate and Jackie spoke of. So what has happened is that report, that baseline report, is now called Characteristics Report for New Individuals and Households. And this demonstrates the customer demographics when they first arrive, when they're new, and they first arrive for services. we definitely want to clarify that this report is not going to be compared with any post-demographic report. There is no such thing. But what this actually does is to give us a picture of what the customers look like, the profile of the customers when they first arrive at the Community Action Agency. So this is a repeat of that we've changed the name to the Characteristics Report for New Characteristics. The other comment was that we didn't need all of the categories that are in the All Characteristics Report, and so these 11 categories were selected as essential to give a good profile of the new customers as they enter the Community Action Agency. You'll see the list there, gender, age, and so on. Make sure you look over this list and think about it as you start to think about what characteristics you collect on your new customers. So one of the things that we're told is that there are programs for which we cannot combine the characteristics of that program with the characteristics of all of the other customers in the agency. And so we've added a place called unknown or not reported as a data point for each category. And so the agencies can say this is the estimated number of new individuals or households that are not included in this report, and tell us what programs serve those individuals and households. This will be a way for us to understand the demographics that we're collecting in a more complete way. So if there are questions on any of this, remember to type your questions in the chat window so that we can address them when we get to that point. So several of the individual and family NPIs were revised, and we want to say again and again so that agencies understand that they're to report only on the indicators that apply to their agency. There's a comprehensive list of NPIs, we believe, and not every agency, of course, will do everything. So only those things that apply to your agency are you going to be reporting on. Tracking outcomes for a 180-day period is a standard that we expect agencies will work towards, but we've also included a 90-day time frame as a way to allow agencies with limited capacity to really start to encourage quarterly review of data. So it's important that we have follow-up, so somebody gets a job, but did they keep it, and so on. That's important information for us to analyze as we move into Roma Next Gen. So we've included some new areas in the list of services. You'll see that it's been expanded, and the words classes and sessions have been removed, as I talked about at the beginning of this section. We have revised the stability measures. We've taken out the middle option, and so we've left with these two options: the number and percent of individuals who achieve one or more of the outcomes identified by the NPIs in the various domains, and the second option, the number and percent of individuals who report improved financial well-being. And there will be directions on how to calculate financial well-being based on a standard survey. So in summary, here are the changes that were made. The new characteristics is the new name. It was shortened. And the unknown and unreported category was added to both of the characteristics report, and it allows for reporting the number of new individuals. We've revised some of the language in the NPIs, as I indicated, and you should look at it very closely to make sure that you understand the new language and are responding to the language as it exists now, and that we've added guidance about reporting on indicators that apply and tracking for 180 days. and we expanded the service list and eliminated one of the stability options. So now I am going to turn it back over to Seth. No, I'm turning it over to Rae to talk about the annual reports. Rae?
Thanks, Barbara. So this is Rae Tamblyn from NASCAS, and I am going to walk us through in a little bit more detail some of the changes that we've done as Barbara presented the overview of those changes, and Jackie presented the sort of the quantitative data behind some of our decisions that we arrived at upon reflection of both the survey data as well as all of the comments and feedback that we received over that initial comment period. OCS and NASCAS worked diligently to read all of your comments as well as understand the data, what the data from the surveys were telling us. And so I want to take just a few minutes to again remind us that we have shifted the format a little bit of the way that this is presented. So within Module 4, we are now breaking it out by section to discuss each of these different forms, if you will. So Section A is the characteristics for the new individuals and households. As Barbara mentioned, this has been renamed from the baseline, and we think that's a really critical change to continue to emphasize to hopefully sort of dispel some of the concern that this would be used as a comparison report as opposed to the intention of this report, which is to provide that sort of at intake upon first connection with a community action agency, what do our participants look like, and what is their level of need that's driving that engagement with the community action agency. Whereas Section B is actually almost identical to our current IS report, which is sort of that end-of-year review reflection on the total number of lives that our services and our programs have touched. With the individual and family NPIs, we've broken it out into a landing page and then data entry forms, and I'm going to go through that in a lot more detail here. And then again, we have done a lot of work on removing the outputs from our outcome indicators, and so Section D is now the opportunity for us to report on those outputs or services that we've provided. Again, our big reflection or our big push here for Roma Next Generation is to really connect the outcomes, the services, and our participants to facilitate this analysis. So just to make sure that we're all on the same page here, obviously our people are the unduplicated count of our program participants. This includes sort of these, the demographics, you know, the unchanged elements, as well as your characteristics like the income, job status, education. And one of the reasons that we're looking for this difference between the new participants versus that reflection back on the end-of-year report is to really get a sense of some of these characteristics. As Barbara mentioned, we've taken the categories down to those key 11 characteristics, and our intent is really to get a sense of the characteristics of folks when they come to us, what their income is, their job status, etc., as well as some more of the standard demographic level, age, race, gender, things like that. Our services are the programs and the services that we're providing. So these are our outputs, and these outputs are intended to support the outcomes. Which are, you know, obtaining a job, completing education, etc. So having sort of laid that foundation, I want to reiterate that the new characteristic report will collect data that creates the profile of individuals and households at the time they first engage with the CAA. And we have heard a lot of feedback on what does that look like, you know, is that 1 year, is it 10 years? And we are working closely with the network, and we welcome any feedback from you on how your programs are set up to collect that data and what kinds of systems are already in place so that you're able to track that over time. And our intention is to really provide that snapshot before people receive any services from a community action agency, so that we're able to get a sense of the impact of community action on people's lives. I want to take a moment to point your attention to a few changes that are really critical to point out in both of our reports here for characteristics. One, as Barbara mentioned, is we've added an unknown and not reported. And that way you'll just be able to sort of get a sense of what data points maybe are not being collected. And then we have an estimated total number of new individuals and new households that are not included in this report. And there's going to be the capacity to report the program. And we understand that there is data sharing and interoperability issues. And part of this, this inclusion here is our intention here is to capture other kinds of programs that are also serving your clients but may need more data sharing or interoperability issues, so that we can also get a sense, again, of the scope of the clients that are coming in that may not be calculated or captured in this new characteristics report. As Barbara mentioned, we have cut this down to the 11 sort of buckets of information that we're hoping to see as this snapshot. So this is the landing page, and one of the reasons that we've built this landing page here is that we really want to emphasize that this is an interactive reporting tool, and it's also underscoring the fact that this is a menu. So you'll come to this page within within an interactive online format, and you'll have the option of checking the boxes next to the indicators upon which you wish to report. I'll just underscore this with the fact that we have actually live documents on our NASCAS site to provide a little bit more examples of how this could be an interactive and living reporting form. So you would basically come to this sort of menu, and as you can see next to income and asset building, you would be checking all the NPIs for which you have outcomes to report. And so you would just check down on the list which indicators you have outcomes to report upon, and then it would generate a data reporting form. So I really want to emphasize this, because when you look at sort of that static PDF document, there are pages of reports. And our intention here is not to build on your reporting burden and to provide more and more data forms. So our intention here is to allow you to simply select the data points as the indicators that you wish to report upon, and then only report in those data entry forms. So we're trying to really cut down on your data entry burden as well. With regards to employment, we have modified some of these reports and some of the indicator language, and on our NASCAS site we do have changes that have been highlighted. I do want to underscore that a lot of this is very similar to the current CSBG IS form, in that we do have our planning accuracy, which is that familiar calculation to us with the 80 to 120% for our ability to sort of project and plan for our achievement of outcomes. And then we've changed the served category. For those of you who've memorized the IS, this is a slightly different language so that we can understand the number of participants that were served in a program. It used to say enrolled, and we have changed this to read served. And this is, again, the standard, the number of participants expected to achieve an outcome and the number of participants who did achieve an outcome. As Barbara mentioned, we have cut down on the stability indicators, and so we have removed the one that had the least positive reception from the network, but we are looking again to the networks to either provide us with more of your thoughts on these two stability measures that we have included here for your comment formally through the OMB comment period. In this form. And again, you can find all of these on the OCS website and on the NASCAS site. I do want to just take a second to flip back here to the employment And I want to reiterate the fact that Barbara mentioned about the guidance on reporting on indicators and the tracking of the outcomes. We have added language that says this will be for those agencies who have the capacity and as reasonable. So our expectation is that the tracking for 180 days and 90 days is the standard to work towards, depending on how your agency is set up and the types of services and programs that you're running. So we will definitely put out more guidance in the future, but we have heard your feedback and have added language into the annual report format and packet that is available for review for this current review period to indicate that this is as reasonable, as applicable, and as capacity allows, while our intention is to really support and promote long-term tracking for this sort of and tracking of the achievement of these outcomes in order to really showcase our long-term results in the lives of the people and families that we serve. So I will go ahead and turn this over to Seth to talk a little bit more about the phased-in reporting and the timelines here. But as I'm going ahead and turning it back over to him, I want to reiterate the fact that we have a lot of tools and resources available to support your review, and we are really encouraging you to review this in depth and provide us with similar comments to those that are coming in so that we can really do another deep assessment of our indicators and the language that we're using. So I will turn it over to Seth.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to very briefly talk about the process in terms of the phasing of the reporting and the likely timelines for submission of data as part of the annual report. What we want to emphasize first is, as we shared earlier in the webinar, there are 4 modules, and Module 1 is provided only by the state CSBG agency and is with many questions that correspond to information that was included in the state plan, and a lot of it relates to state accountability measures. So that piece of the report is the first part of the annual report that will be phased in according to our current plans and timelines. We automated the annual state plan in fiscal year 2016, and our intention is that the submission of Module 1, the first submission of Module 1, which is the state administrative report, would take place in March of 2017. So that's certainly the first piece of the overall system we would work to put in place. Modules 2, 3, and 4 all involve data that are collected, organized, and submitted by the local eligible entities, reviewed by states, and then submitted to OCS as part of the annual report. All of these are staggered at two years later, so they are it's going to be a fiscal year 2018 report. So the first actual submission to OCS would be in March 31st of 2019. But recognize that means that data collection would begin in fiscal year 2018. So just so we are currently in fiscal year 2016. That ends in September 30th of this year. We then have a further fiscal year, will be in 2017, and then in 2018, fiscal year 2018, states and local eligible entities would begin the data collection necessary for modules 2 through 4. So the next steps in the process, I just want to highlight, we're going to talk a little bit, I just want to encourage everybody, we mentioned earlier that OCS put out a detailed Dear Colleague letter. This is the slide that's showing here has the web address, website to get the link to review that. And if you haven't already reviewed that, I think it's important and strongly encourage you to do that. And just moving to the next slide, there are several attachments to that Dear Colleague message. And again, we would just encourage that in order to comment on the in the 60-day comment period, these are the documents that we have made available through our website, and so just strongly encourage you all to make sure you have gone, reviewed our Dear Colleague message. It may answer some questions, it may raise others, but certainly important for the context. Okay. Now I'm going to hand over, I guess Jackie is going to talk a little bit more about other webinars that are upcoming, and then we're going to move into a question and answer period.
Yes, great, Seth. Thank you very much. And I think Kate mentioned at the beginning of this presentation that we do have an upcoming webinar on July 14th from 2 to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time on modules 1 and 2. And we also had done a recorded webinar of the overview of the state administration module, which is now posted on the NASCASP website. But the one on July 14th will also be able to give you the opportunity to ask questions. All right, now moving ahead, this is, as you can see, the NASCASP website where there is information. We have a couple of web pages to provide information for you. You can see that this one talks about the 60-day comment period that we're currently in. It has the link to the Dear Colleague letter as well as the Federal Register notice. And then also, and I know Ray's mentioned a couple times, and I think Steph and Kate did as well, there are lots of tools and resources to support your review that's on the NASCASP website. There are the Excel spreadsheets that Rae did mention. The Excel spreadsheets are there for modules 2, 3, and 4, so you definitely want to go and take a look at those. There's also examples of the state and national reports and how the information would roll up to the state and national levels. There is the modified collective impact tool as well. You'll also see the Mythbusters blog that was started during the initial feedback period, and we continue to add information to that. There are posters which are a visual representation of the items in Roma Next Generation, so you can see all the components. So that's turned out to be very useful as well. There is a crosswalk of the current CSBG IS report along with the proposed annual report to help you compare the components. And then the tools that were created during the initial feedback period that you may have already reviewed back in March and April, they're also on the NASCASP website as well for you to look at. And please do review those. They will help. Also, some helpful links. You'll see Seth mentioned the link to the Federal Register notice with submission instructions for comments. So you definitely want to take a look at that because that will give you some more information on how to submit your comments. The CSBG Dear Colleague letter with the open comment period, and the CSBG Dear Colleague letter has the email address for submitting your comments. And then on the NASCASP website is information on the OMB clearance process, just in case you want to know more about it. And then also it has all those supplemental tools and resources that I mentioned to support your review of the annual report. And now I believe I'm going to turn it over to Kate to walk us through some of the questions we've received from all of you.
Type in for us. We have gotten quite a few, so we also need a chance to kind of look at them. So we'll come back in a couple of minutes and start walking through some of the questions. But want to reiterate, we do have, I think, about another half hour, so we can get through quite a few of them, hopefully. If we can't answer something, we will confer, and as Jackie mentioned earlier, we will put together a document and have a FAQ up on the website. So we will answer all these questions. We may not answer them today, but we're going to do our level best to see what we can get done. So let's take 2 minutes, and we'll be back to you then. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, I think we're about ready to start. And obviously, if you have questions, keep typing them in. What we're going to do is I will read the question so we're all on the same page. And you need to know that we're not all in the same room, so different ones of us may wish to answer the question, and we'll see who wants to answer it. NASCAS may answer it, OCS may answer it. We'll do our best, and we are recording this, so hopefully we can get through it. Okay, question 1. Will there be TA support when we begin to develop our local theory of change? NASCAS, you want to give it a shot at this one?
It's Barbara.
Barbara,
we've already started looking at how to help agencies develop that local theory of change. We have some worksheets that we've designed as part of some pilots with some local agencies. So there will be some information about local theories of change coming out that'll be available. And there'll also be some, depending upon how things roll out with some of the other TNTA initiatives, there will also be some additional modules and things available online. So there'll be a lot of technical assistance about that.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. Just by the way, we are just going to go through the questions as they were received. So that was the first question we got. Second question, will CAAs receive funding to implement the changes to demographic and outcome reporting? In order to collect and track the required information, we will need to pay for some changes to our database. Are we expected to bear those costs ourselves?
So it's Seth Hassett, and we continue to analyze and look at the burden and costs that are associated with this data effort. We recognize there is a concern about the initial cost, and the general expectation is we would have to work within our existing appropriations and allocations. But we're looking at ways to provide support either through systems and recognizing that some agencies and states are at different places in terms of their data systems and capacity. But the short answer is we do have to work within what we have in our existing appropriations. We do continue to analyze and look at ways to both reduce the burden and provide support to make this to provide as many options as possible for how to collect and provide the data and adjust our data systems.
Okay, thanks, Seth. Question 3, we are being asked to collect information on people when they are new to us. We need some more definition on new. What if someone was a participant 10 years ago? Are they new 4 years ago, 1 year ago? Who wants to tackle that one?
Well, I can start to talk about it. It's Barbara. We're asking for this. You have to keep in mind why we're asking for this information. We're asking for it as a way to determine what the customers look like before they receive services. So if someone came 10 years ago but hasn't been back since, they would be essentially new for the purposes of finding out what they look like before they receive a service. They're looking for a service. If they were here last year, you would have to determine whether or not they've been getting service throughout the year or not. I think that this is going to be something that gets worked on jointly with the agencies involved.
And I think this is Seth. I think this is certainly an important question in terms of making sure, and it's something certainly we will continue to consider in terms of other clarification or clarifying guidance that we might be able to provide, and where do we want to leave some discretion for the states and agencies in terms of the parameters, but certainly this is something that we will take into account and certainly can also be included in questions and comments that we'll address, as part of the 60-day comment period.
And I think, this is Kate, I think I would also add to what Barbara said in terms of we're trying to look at what are people, how are they presenting, what do they look like before we give them service. This, if you think of it in terms of performance management, this is really a demand question, and it helps tell the community action story. What types of people are coming to us? What does poverty look like? What has changed? What are the trends? So you're going to want to take all of that into account when you decide this is a new person, because people may be different who come to you from year to year because of things that have happened in your community. So I think we will provide, continued definition for this. Question 4. Thought I heard that the 180-day follow-up would only be used of CAAs if CAAs had programs that required the 180-day follow-up. Can you clarify when a CAA would need to report on the 180-day status? Let me make a first stab at that. We only have a handful of MPIs, I think, in the employment, housing, and health domains that ask for the 90 and 180-day. And I think what we're talking about is that the instruction we've provided is that we want the 180 days to be the standard that everyone would be expected to work toward, but that the time frame of 90 days, which is what is more the standard now, is included to allow agencies with somewhat limited capacity to report on this time frame and to encourage other kinds of review. So I think we are looking to push this a bit, but let me turn it to Seth, who has a thought too.
Yeah, I would just say that I think we are looking to, we have been in the process of this effort looking to have a meaningful period in terms of these types of outcomes, employment, housing, and health, that certainly indicates that it has sustained for a significant period of time. We've looked also, and in this process have been trying to look at other related federal partners and other areas, WIOA, or other kinds of housing outcomes that are routinely tracked through other funding sources. In many cases, they go much far beyond 180 to 270 days or other time frames. So this was seen as a reasonable standard for CSBG, but as we've said, that's the standard we're looking to move toward, and only for those this limited range of program areas where again, employment and housing and health, where there would be a service that would be expected to have taken and be able for someone to sustain the outcome for a reasonable period of time.
Question number 5, if the new characteristic report is being rolled up to the state level to show how new customers may look, can you discuss how a large CAA's results would be treated so not to impact or skew the summary of new customers for the state? If not rolled up to the state level, please let me know. This might be a good question for a state. How does the state want to look at the data? What is it they want to know? But does anyone here have an answer to that?
NASCAP may have some things to share about this, but I think the important thing is, we're trying to look at this as, I think of Roma and think of these indicators as the first level of analysis being at the agencies themselves, having information on who's new, and certainly there's a conversation and ongoing work between the state and the CAA. So that doesn't change in the sense that if you have a particularly large community action agency or, in one state that outweighs the others, we need to, would be a current challenge, and it certainly would affect when you aggregate the data into one state report. If that's all impacted by one large CAA, we may lose some of that meaning once we aggregate it and put it in a full report to Congress or whatever. But we would still want to see that the agencies themselves are using the information, that there is analysis and conversation taking place between the state and the CAA, and of course this whole, as with the current CSBG IS, there is the ability to look at the entities. Each entity puts its own report in. So I'm not certainly, I think it's something we could talk about further or look to understand further in terms of what the question or concern would be, but but generally, I would just think of this as a multi-level effort, and the higher up you get in terms of the collection, aggregation, and reporting of data, you know, the more you are going to have, if there's a particularly large community action agency or particularly that's going to impact the data for the state, and but that may not, again, we're using it for different purposes. Yeah. So I don't know if there's other things to add about that, and we certainly would welcome further kind of clarifying questions as a, you know, as a follow-up.
Question 6, please explain the difference in terms of domain and indicators. It appears they're being used interchangeably, but they are two different things. No, they are two very different things. The domains are kind of the big buckets, like employment is a domain, housing is a domain, infrastructure, income asset is a domain, and then under the domains are the indicators, the outcomes that we want to track in each of those domains. Any other?
Another way to think about the domains is that they're similar to the CSBG categories that are currently in Section E. So it's the big categories. Indicators are specific ways that you can tell whether a goal or an outcome has been achieved.
And to say that in yet another way, one of the abilities of breaking this out by sort of those buckets or the domains versus the indicators is the indicators allow us to speak at a higher level of specificity. So within employment, we can also start to talk about the detail of unemployed and obtained a job. But it helps us to be able to tell the story in broad brush strokes by, let's say, employment, how many agencies are working across the nation in employment versus how many agencies are specifically targeting their employment programs to ensure that people who are unemployed then obtain a job. So it just allows us to speak about the Community Action Agency Network's efforts in those varying levels of detail.
Okay, question 7, will there be guidance provided on which MPIs to use or to select under what circumstances to provide consistency in reporting across agencies and across the country? Anyone want to make a stab at that? I guess I would say that this is what, I mean, I think we can provide guidance, but the main guidance is if you provide services based on the assessment that you've made, the assessment in your community is that, you know, unemployment is an issue, you want to deal with providing employment services, you would select outcomes in the employment arena. If homelessness is an issue, then and you're providing services in the homeless area, you want to connect your outcomes to the services, to the assessment, to the needs you've identified. I don't know if we can, if there's any other further guidance you'd want to provide. Yeah.
Another way to think about that is what are the goals that have been identified in your community action plan? If your goals are specifically geared towards employment or housing, then you would use the indicators that are connected, the appropriate indicators that are connected to your work. So it's all tied together in the documents that you're already doing. This is not, we're not asking you to create some new whole system of identifying what it is you do. We're just giving you better tools to report what you've done.
So another way to, sorry, Barbara. Another way to think about this, I think, is that this new characteristics report that we're still hearing concerns about is intended to show what people look like before services. And what we mean by that is not that we're implying that there's going to be a before and after comparison, but it serves as sort of the place to start. So your new clients are going to be reflected, generally speaking, in the services that you're providing. If you see a large spike in new customers who are coming to you seeking support in housing, for example, you would expect then that to also meet or match your community needs assessment if you've seen a recent spike in housing needs, and then that would also show up sort of as you go through the reporting year. You would see that reflected in the services provided, in the outcomes that you're achieving, for example, in the way that you're targeting as you move through the reporting year. So it's sort of reflecting, as Barbara said, this is all tied into your community needs assessment and where you are at the beginning of projecting and starting your programs and the services that you're implementing and the strategies that you're doing to tackle that community need.
Question number 8. I'm moving along a little bit. We have quite a few, and we're probably not going to get to all of them. So question 8 is, Barbara, are we expected to attempt to collect the new characteristics from all agency clients, including workforce development, Head Start, refugee services, and other discretionary, not just CSBG grant program participants for which the agency administers? I think it's a yes or no.
Well, yes, it's always been the case that we've asked for that for all agency clients.
Well, but I would emphasize that we did also, recognizing there are some circumstances where agencies have some challenges with their data systems or ultimately cannot reconcile. One of the adjustments we did make in the new, in some of these reports was to allow states to entities to report or estimate on people that could not be captured through with the existing data capacity. But the general expectation is for all the services and activities to collect the new characteristics.
Question number 9. Some MPIs ask for measurements of things that would require some sort of validated tool to measure, for instance, increased sensitivity and responsiveness in their interactions with their children or families who improve skills related to the adult role of parents. Parenting is very culture-bound, and people's judgments about what improvement is bound to be subjective. How in heaven's name could we reliably and consistently measure such things?
So one of the things that a lot of these NPIs look at, or we are attempting to align with information that would potentially be available as part of, for example, if an agency is a Head Start provider or and already goes through other types of assessment. We've tried to do some alignment with information that would be coming through other systems, such as working with Head Start. So I think that many of these questions are closely aligned with other federal funding sources and other already known data sources. But I don't know if anyone from Barbara or anyone from NASCAP would want to comment further on that.
So this is Rae. I will go ahead and reiterate what Seth said, in that as we were working through since 2013, I believe, we've been examining the data that CAAs report to us on sort of the top funders of CAAs in addition to CSBG, as well as working with the indicators that are put forth by other programs that fund and support community action agencies. So in general, we have done a walkthrough over this period of time to make sure that questions that we're asking enable you to report to your multiple funders and to fit outcomes under those larger or smaller buckets. So if you have Head Start, for example, our guidance has been that you would have reported in the current CSBG in the 6.3 section asks about infants and children, for example. And so as we move forward, we will definitely make sure to underscore in instructions and guidance as we roll this out on where possible funding sources would align with their indicators as required by their reports, as how that aligns with the CSBG-IS. And our intention was not to take the language from each funding source and mirror it exactly, since we know that multiple programs and multiple funding sources are being reported into our indicators. So we made them, generally speaking, a little more broad than some of the more nuanced indicators. For example, Head Start indicators, we have expanded ours to include those, but also other early childhood programs or services that may not be specifically Head Start, but are being run by community action agencies.
I'm going to move us along. We were asked to provide some clarification about the timeline for agencies to collect data that begins in fiscal year 18.
So just to reiterate that, so a federal fiscal year goes from September 30th to begins October 1st and ends September 30th. So when we talked about federal fiscal year 18, it begins in September 30th of 2017. Likewise, in the beginning of a federal fiscal year is in September of the year prior. One of the things that when we talked about the different modules, the Module 1, we are asking all states to report and collect and report information based on the federal fiscal year. The current guidance has been that states will collect and report on the current cycle in terms of modules 2, 3, and 4, the current cycle of data collection that they have been administering with the community action agencies. So that may mean a state fiscal year. There is a table that has been available through NASCAS. But generally, just to keep in mind, a federal fiscal year, federal fiscal year 18 would begin in October 1st of 2017. So it's essentially about a year and a half from now, or a year and 3 months from now.
Okay, 12, we have a question and a long comment. I'm not sure we can get through all of it. Let's see what parts we can do here. I think we've got some 20 or 30 questions, so we're going to keep plowing through. I'm encouraged to hear that you intend to offer definitions of all the terms you're using in the indicators, things like living wage, net worth, et cetera, and yes, that is one of the next tasks. Unfortunately, we have some time to be able to do that. In addition, the comment is, please let us know over what time period, where to measure change. For instance, what happens when someone who has been homeless obtains housing and then becomes homeless again in the same year. Yes, this is all the type of guidance that we would be providing, and this is the kind of comment you may want to provide when you're providing comments. So this is something that we certainly can be addressing. Number 13, aren't all and new characteristics recorded at the same time, especially for one-time emergency safety net services? NASCAS, you want to take that one?
The idea is that we would have two time periods, that you would have the all client report would include all of the new people as well, but it would include other people that are ongoing. So if you see someone only once in a year, that person would appear in both the new and in the all. Does that answer the question?
I think what we want to, there are some services for which there would only be one point in time of information where someone came in once, received some sort of, for example, emergency support, and they weren't seen again in the agency. There are other people who may be participating in services over the course of the year or may have been working with the agency over the crossover between multiple years. And so the distinction here is people who are new to the entity, upon basically first contact or first intake to the agency or services would be in the new characteristics, but yes, they would also show up in the all characteristics report as well. So it's intended to understand both what the characteristics of people that had not been seen by the agency, were new to the agency, and then everybody that was served.
Next question is, how does OCS and OMB want to receive feedback, letters, documents that have been marked up, by adding comments within the PDF documents? Prefer single CAA letters, state level letters.
A couple of things. So when we mentioned the Dear Colleague message, that has there is a particular web address. I don't have it in front of me, but you can find it, that is where we will officially receive any comments. We will take any comments in any format, but we did provide some guidance in our Dear Colleague message about what would be most helpful. Certain things we would certainly point out. Obviously, if you have questions if you have comments that relate to a particular indicator, a particular question or information item in the module, the more specific you can be in terms of the module, the question number, and again, making a distinction. Is the comment that the information is either not, is it useful, relevant, feasible, and then, or are there things where you have a specific wording suggestion? Again, the more specific you can get, the more responsive we can be. What I would, again, just, we have outlined that in the Dear Colleague message, and it gives both the web address where you can submit your comments, as well as sort of our guidance in terms of kind of what would be most useful or how we can be most responsive to your comments. In terms of the issue of, we would encourage certainly if either associations or groups of entities want to combine comments and provide them, certainly we'd like to know that who all is represented as much as possible and to take that into account. But the broad message here is we will take any and all comments during this 60-day period, and but they should be provided through our website and through the address that was distributed in our Dear Colleague and is available on our website.
I think we have time probably for 2 more questions. The next one is, I assume that since we operate off a SFY,
State fiscal year.
A state fiscal year, that we should plan for agencies to begin collecting their data for the annual report 7/1/2017. Is that correct?
So the answer that I was providing earlier, right now that has been our current plan, has been to tie to whatever the current data cycle has been within the agency. So if you begin a new fiscal year and begin your new reports in July, then you would follow what your current cycle was at the beginning of that fiscal year. So that would seem to be correct. That is our current planning assumption. If there are issues with that or difficulties, we would certainly share those with us, and we will review that.
Okay. The next question is, you said some MPIs were revised because of the comments. Which ones? NASCAP, remind me, but I think there's a document that displays all of the changes. Is that located on your website as one of the tools?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so you can find that on the NASCAP website. Now, next question I think we can do too is, who will analyze the data to provide agencies with the information on what works and what does not work so we can improve our programs?
We'll analyze the data. So I think that this is an interesting question. So who will analyze the data, provide agencies with information on what works and what does not work so we can improve our programs? I think the biggest thing I would say, and others may have different thoughts or opinions about this, but ultimately the goal here is that the local agency, the promotion of the Roma cycle is really about promoting a local cycle of needs assessment, of setting goals, analyzing data according to the results and indicators that were included, and then making adjustments in a cyclical basis. I think there's a role for the state and to what I call a conversation, to promote a conversation. We're not looking for as we shared at the beginning in terms of the DIPRA modernization goals, we're not looking for a punitive conversation. We're looking for a supportive conversation, one that also there are technical assistance agencies. There can be roles for other ways, of innovative ways of working and sharing and analyzing the data. I think we're working to move in a direction so that obviously, the crux of this is the local agencies as the center of the Roma cycle, the state as a supportive agent, but with also, engaged conversation about the results, what were the goals that were set, encouraging entities to set ambitious goals and to strive to meet them. And then across, as we roll things up at the state level and then at the national level, it'll be more about gleaning examples or particular service areas that we can report on, strong results or what seems to have sort of shown up as practices that should be disseminated or could be disseminated. We're really looking to create the infrastructure here and the tools that can promote a multi-level conversation and a multi-level process of analysis. We don't have all the answers on that, in terms of it's not going to be at just one place that analysis should take place. But the center of it does need to be the Community Action Agency.
Okay, so we got through about 16, 17 questions. We have about 10 more, but this is the end of our webinar. It is great that we got this many questions. As we mentioned, we will look at the rest, and all the ones we've answered obviously are taped, but we will provide answers to the questions we were not able to get to, and you'll be able to access those on the NASCAS site. Just a reminder, there are many tools on the NASCAS site. A lot that explain even more than we were able to do in this webinar. That's where you can download the slides. You can download a lot more of the Dear Colleague letter and how to respond. So thank you very much. Again, thank you for your questions, and we look forward to future discussions.